brought some sage, and we're going to you're welcome to come up and smudge if you would like to. And then Dr. Warner will say a blessing, and then we'll introduce ourselves. If you're unfamiliar with the smudging process, it's not scary. I'm assuming with all the work you do, you are not unfamiliar. Sacred ceremonial Penn Stater bathroom tray. Just like to start and make sure that all of our good thoughts, all of our good intentions are taken up to the Creator, so we can engage in dialogue with you and share our stories with you and know that all of us have come together to learn from one another.
Creator, we come to you this afternoon with spirits that are interested in seeking our intersections of our histories and the truth of our futures. Penn State is important to the three of us, and we have some experiences to share. And we ask that you bless our words, keep us in a good thought, and share with us, share with each other the future of Indian education and how that might be, how we might produce that for our children and our grandchildren.
So thank you all for being here today. I do want to mention, as you may have noticed, the panel is being filmed. If you don't want to be on film, they're primarily going to be focused on us, but just to let you know it's there, and maybe raise your hand, and the cameraman will avoid filming you. But then I'd like to, again, welcome you all here to this room, and thank you to Hollie for that opening. It was very powerful. And I also want to acknowledge that we here at Penn State are on the ancestral home of the Erie, the Seneca, the Oneida, Lenape, Munsee, and Shawnee, and Susquehannock tribes. So my name's Kathleen Cahill. I'm a professor here in the history department at Penn State, and I'm on the program committee for this conference. And so when we started meeting a year ago to talk about hosting ethnohistory here, and what, all of the basic details of having a conference, but also those of us in the field of Indigenous studies have been trying in recent years to be more cognizant of the Indigenous histories of the places where we live. That's not always very visible. It certainly is not as visible in Pennsylvania as it was where I used to live, which was in New Mexico. And so when I moved here 2 years ago, a lot of people that I knew in New Mexico mentioned to me the American Indian Leadership Program that had been at Penn State, and in particular, John Tippecanock, who had been one of the former directors. And everyone told me I needed to look him up. Unfortunately, he had already left, but I thought, well, when we're having the meeting, maybe this would be a good opportunity for me to find out more about this history of this place that I was now coming to live in and to work at. And so I went around campus and found there's a historical marker. Penn State likes its historical markers, which I appreciate. And there is one for the American Indian Leadership Building over by the School of Education. And, it's a little short, but it tells you that for about 40 years, Penn State had a program through the College of Education that helped to train Indigenous or Native American leaders, right? So it doesn't tell you a lot about what that means. And I learned from other conversations that this was part of a BIA grant-funded program. But that's about all that I knew. And so I wanted to think about this conference as an opportunity to learn more myself about that, but also to hear again about and place our conference in the context of Indigenous history. And in Pennsylvania, that usually means like a deep, right, like 17th, 18th, maybe early 19th century. But this was a moment to talk about sort of very recent history and how Penn State has been connected to Indigenous histories through this program. So I'm really thrilled that some of the people that I contacted were willing to come back. They all have very busy schedules, and they were willing to come here today to talk to us. So I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they'll sort of speak to us really, and then I gave them a couple questions that I will let you know the questions, but I also I told them they didn't need to feel bound to it, right? That they might have other things to talk about that they want to talk about. So I envision this very much as a conversation, and we'll open it for audience questions a little bit later after they say some things. And I'm looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to learning more. So thank you all very much for coming. So the first person I'll introduce is Dr. Linda Sue Warner, who's at the far end of the table. She's a member of the Comanche Tribe of Oklahoma and has extensive experience and knowledge in Indigenous pedagogy, using Native ways of knowing as the primary framework. Dr. Warner's degree from the University of Oklahoma Norman is in general administration, and she served as the director of the American Indian Leadership Program here at Penn State from 1993 to 1995. She has 49 years experience working with American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian peoples. All right? Exactly.
She's really old.
A lot of knowledge there. She's extensively published with over 250 articles, presentations, technical reports, books, and book chapters that explore processes linked to cultural knowledge bases and pedagogy. In April 2018, she was honored with a Career Achievement Award from the University of Oklahoma. She also writes that she has 2 sons and 3 grandchildren and resides in Northeast Oklahoma. And next to her is Dr. Susan C. Faircloth, who's an enrolled member of the Coharie Tribe of North Carolina. She is professor and director of the School of Education at Colorado State University. Dr. Faircloth is a graduate of the American Indian Leadership Program here at Penn State, and then she also served as co-director and then director of the program between 2003 and 2012. Her research interests include Indigenous education, the education of culturally and linguistically diverse students with special educational needs, and the moral and ethical dimensions of school leadership. She's published very widely in a variety of journals, including the Educational Administrative Quarterly, Harvard Educational Review, the Journal of Special Education Leadership, International Studies in Education Administration, Values and Ethics in Education Administration, Tribal College Journal of American Indian Higher Education, Rural Special Education Quarterly, and the Journal of Disability Policy Studies. She's also a senior associate editor of the American Journal of Education and on the editorial board of the Journal of American Indian Education, and chair of the Technical Review Panel for National Indian Education Study conducted by the National Center for Education Statistics of the Office of Indian Education and Educational Testing Services. So again, a lot of experience and engagement in the field. She is a former Fulbright Scholar to New Zealand, a Ford Foundational postdoctoral fellow, and a Civil Rights Project, Proyecto Derechos Civiles, at the University of Los Angeles, and research fellow with the with the American Indian Alaska Native Head Start Research Center at the University of Colorado, Denver. And she is a recent William C. Friendly Fellow for Human Relations. She lives with her husband Lee in Fort Collins, Colorado, with their 9-year-old Journey, and their dogs Teddy, Prince, and Apollo, an assortment of other pets. Sounds intriguing. And she attributes her pathway to education to her parents, Jean and Marie, and her tribal elders. According to her, quote, "They knew I was destined to be an educator long before I did." And our third panelist, Hollie Mackey, is an enrolled member of the Northern Cheyenne Nation and associate professor at North Dakota State University. Her scholarship empirically examines structural inequality of indigenous and other marginalized populations in education leadership and public policy through multiple critical frameworks and methodologies. As an experienced policy consultant, public speaker, program evaluator, and community educator, she seeks to bridge theory and practice, which we were talking about earlier, as a means of addressing complex social issues from interdisciplinary perspectives. She's the recipient of the DJ Willowblower Center for the Study of Leadership and Ethics Award for Excellence and the Jack Culbertson Award for Outstanding Accomplishments as a junior professor of educational leadership. She serves as the associate co-director for the Barbara Jackson Scholars Network at the University Council for Education Administration and associate director of the Consortium for the Study of Learning and Ethics in Education. Dr. Mackey designed and currently serves as the founding director of the RAVEN Project, which stands for Reconciling Accountability and Visibility for Engaged Native Communities. It's a multi-state collaborative policy initiative addressing the missing and murdered Indigenous people. Her publications are also found across a wide range. They're in the Wiley, Information Age, Emerald, Rowan and Littlefield, Lawrence Elbrum and Associates, and Rutledge Publishers, as well as in a number of journals, Educational Administration Quarterly, the International Journal for Qualitative Studies in Education, Mentoring and Tutoring, and the Journal of Education Administration, the Journal for Critical Thought and Praxis, and the e-Journal for Educational Policy, as well as the International Journal of Education Policy and Leadership, and the Teachers College Record. So again, very distinguished guests. I am so pleased that they took the time to join us. And I gave them a few questions that I'll just throw out there, but again, you don't feel bound by them. I asked them to talk a little bit about the history of the program, how it started, and maybe how it changed over time for those 4 decades. What they might say are the key issues facing Indigenous leaders or that require leadership in Indigenous communities, and maybe that has changed over time as well. And then what they think the legacy of the American Indian Leadership Program at Penn State is in Indian country. And then maybe especially what the legacy was for them, and did the program have a particular impact on the 3 of them as female leaders, right? And does that matter? And finally, if we're thinking about the future of Indigenous education, broadly conceived, what advice they might have, both for Penn State or other non-tribal institutions. And so again, I'm going to stop talking and basically facilitate and turn it over to Dr. Warner.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share the panel with these distinguished scholars, who, by the way, I think were my students. So I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you this afternoon. I would like to talk about the Penn State Leadership Program from the very early days through the time I left, because that's, of course, what I know best. But also the program changed significantly after that, and I'll kind of segue into Susan explaining why that changed. But early on, as Kathleen said, it really was funded by the Department of Interior. And what's interesting about that was William Demrett, whose Tlingit was the director of the Office of Indian Education Programs in Interior, and he funded this program, but he was a Harvard graduate. And there were 3 programs that initially funded the preparation of American Indian administrators at the master's level. And again, let me give you the caveat that I'm remembering this the way I lived it, and it may not be exactly the same for everyone. But there was a program at Minnesota And there was a program at Harvard, the program here at Penn State, and later a program at Arizona State. And I don't know that there were any others, but that's kind of what I think there were. And when Dr. Demmerich started this program, he started it with Professor Lynch, who was on the Faculty of Education Administration here at Penn State. And at the time, as I understand it, the School of Education, and particularly Education Administration, was the #1 program in the country. And between Penn State, Harvard, and Wisconsin, they were always kind of battling in those rankings to see which one was the best program. But at the time, early on, Penn State held that ranking because of the distinguished professors who were here. Now, later I joined the faculty with some of those same professors that I had in class, and for the most part, just adored them and really had some very engaging conversations. But I have to tell you, one of the reasons that I left Penn State to get my doctorate someplace else was because those professors hadn't been in a classroom in 30 years. And I somehow didn't think that made sense. But they did create an incredible legacy here. None of these people were Indian. I don't know why they started, I don't know why they had an interest in American Indians, but I do know that they were very smart about how they went about this, in that as soon as they graduated an American Indian in the master's program, he moved into the doctoral program. And then as soon as he graduated in the doctoral program, they turned the program over to him. So very early on, this business of Indian people taking control of Indian education was alive and well at Penn State. And the first director of the program, of course, was Dr. Gerald Gipp, who's Hunk Papa Sioux, and went on to an incredibly distinguished career. But let's ratchet it back. The program was established to create principals who would come in, get their principal credentials, and I'm much, much earlier than these ladies, so their stories are going to be significantly different. When I went back home, I had a credential that I could get a job with. That didn't always happen throughout the program. But also what happened was, as soon as people started getting degrees, they started getting really good jobs. Like Dr. Gipp went from director of this program to the Office of Indian Education for the Department of Education as an assistant secretary, the highest American Indian government official at the time. We had another gentleman who went right to CEO of the Council for Exceptional Children. I mean, people just went up into policy positions immediately after getting their degrees here. And so one of the other things that I remember, I don't know if these ladies even know, was, we all went to AERA, but the Penn State Student Association created the American Indian SIG for AERA. And as a result, the Student Association controlled a lot of what was presented as Indian education at the time. And so throughout the 70s and early 80s, we kind of got this little weird name of the Penn State Mafia, because if it was going to happen in Indian education, somebody with a Penn State connection was in charge of it. And that brings me back to even further. When Dr. Lynch started this program, he did a really unique thing in the acceptance and admission of students to the program. That is, he went to them and interviewed them. And then, after a year, he took other students from the program to them to interview them. So it was almost, this colonized way of thinking about a fraternity. When you joined, you had really passed several levels of scrutiny beyond graduate college. You had to get admitted to graduate college, just like everybody else. We had to take the classes everybody else had. And then we got to take an extra class. So the other programs that I mentioned, I don't believe evolved that way. And as a result, they dropped off over the history of Indian education. And I think I'll kind of stop there. I do want to point out that when I left in, what'd she say, 95, it was at that point still an American Indian Education Administration program. Mm-hmm. After I left and John came, the focus changed a little bit, and I'll let Susan pick up from there.
Thank you. So good afternoon. I had to laugh because Hollie put us in order of our age, and so I said thanks for outing us in terms of how old we are. So as Kathleen said, I'm Susan Faircloth, and my tribe is Coharie, and I'm from North Carolina. And I'm honored here to be on the panel. I was a student, came into the leadership program just as Dr. Warner was getting ready to go out, and then was a faculty member and co-director and director of the program when Hollie was here as a student. And we've also had an opportunity to work together as colleagues in educational leadership and administration. I also have a daughter, Journey, that Kathleen mentioned, who is adopted and is Cheyenne and Arapaho. And so I always look to Hollie to bring gifts and things for our daughter. And I appreciate that connection. I think that's something that a leadership program has been for many of us, is about more than just an academic home or an academic program, that particularly when you're a Native faculty member or a Native student at Penn State, you're in the minority. And it's a very white place to be. And so you have to really think about those ways. I mean, another person who I think has been instrumental to a lot of students is John Sanchez, who's a faculty member over in the College of Communications, and is preparing to have a kidney transplant in the next few days. And so if you would all keep him in your thoughts and prayers. But somebody who has created a lot of community, I think, for Native students and faculty here. So I'll give you a little bit about my story, and then just a few pictures that I wanted to share. I think we're really focusing on the history at the moment, right? And then other questions. And so when I thought about this today, I thought about this. It was a statement when I put it together, and a minute or two ago I changed it to a question, and that was honoring the dreams of our elders, rebuilding a tradition of leadership in Indian Ed. And that was really sparked by some conversations that we had as we walked down the hallway of, has the time passed for there to be a recapturing of that tradition at Penn State? Or is there a new era? And I really think that that's the question that's been bantered around for the last few years. I also wanted to just share a copy of, or a picture of the historical marker that Kathleen had referenced. This marker went missing for a few years while I was here as a faculty member because there was some construction on campus, and those of us who were here at that time were very adamant that that marker be found and that it be placed back at the Rackley building, and that's the building in which the American Indian Leadership Program was housed. I'll show you just a couple other pictures of people who've been in the program, and then I'll talk to you more about my study, or about my story. I think this picture is particularly powerful because it traces a lot of the history of the leadership program, and it speaks to why the American Indian Leadership Program has been referenced to as the Penn State Mafia. And you'll see Dr. Warner is in the picture. And next to her, you'll have to help me if I get these people wrong, but next to her is Bruce Ramirez. Bruce is the person that she referenced, who was one of the first graduates of the leadership program and went on to be one of the executive directors of the Council for Exceptional Children in D.C. So that's the nation's leading organization that works with teachers and educators of children with disabilities. Next to him is Jerry Gipp, who is also the first Native director. Or next to you, sorry. Next to Linda is our elders always correct us. So if I get it wrong, I'll know that I get it corrected. So Jerry Gipp is next to her. As she indicated, he was the first Native director of the program. He also went on to work for the National Science Foundation. He has a brother who's a president, or was a president of a tribal college. Jerry then went into retirement and then was called back to be the executive director of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, which represents and advocates on behalf of the nation's tribally controlled colleges and universities. And my connection to him is when I graduated with my doctoral degree in December of 2000 and didn't know what I was going to do with this doctoral degree. In educational leadership, the connection that I had between him and my advisor, who was John Tipiconic, was a job. And the American Indian Higher Ed Consortium was looking for a director of policy analysis and research. And so there was a connection there between Jerry and John Tipiconic and the leadership program. And so my first job out of my doctoral program was working as this person in charge of policy analysis and research with the tribal colleges. And I think that, again, speaks to this history that we've had, is that we're very well connected and that we've opened up doors for a lot of people. They've opened up doors for us, but I think those connections have opened up a lot of doors for Native people. And the next to Jerry is Leo Nolan, who went on to have a high-ranking position with the Indian Health Service, which works with Native people who are federally recognized across the nation. And then next to him is Tom Davis, who is a president of Turtle Mountain Community College, which is one of the tribal colleges in the nation.
Jim Davis.
Jim Davis, thanks. And then the next photo is one of the last cohorts, and I have 3 photos. One of the last cohorts of the students who went through the American Indian Leadership Program. And you'll see I'm in there. John Tipiconic is the one who's losing his hair in the back. And then there's Peter Desmond. And he is Navajo Dene. And then you'll see people, we've got somebody on the front, the one who has the kind of handkerchief around her neck, probably would hold the record for coming the furthest away to be in the program, and she held from around the Arctic Circle. And so you can see the range all the way from the plains and the Dakotas all the way out to the farthest reaches of Alaska. And this I think that is really representative of the types and variety of Native students that we had over the years, because we graduated more than 218 American Indian and Alaska Native students with their master's and doctoral degrees. This is another photo that has Dr. Tipiconic in it. Dr. Warner's also in that photo. When I left as the last director of the leadership program, I grabbed as many photos as I could and copied them.
Minnesota, like Indian director now.
Right. And tried to just keep as much of that history as I could, because I wasn't sure what would happen to it. Among those things that I have is Dr. Tipiconic's dissertation, my dissertation, and just a lot of other photos that we were able to take pictures of over the years. And then this is Hollie is in this photo, and this shows, again, one of the last cohorts that were here at Penn State out with the lion. And then the question that I had after this is, what does the future hold for the program? And I think that's really where we are. But a little bit about my story before I turn it over to Hollie is that I have an undergraduate degree in Latin American history, political science, and anthropology. Wanted to be FBI, CIA, something like that. Never ever wanted to be in education. I graduated with this degree, non-teaching, went home, and my parents said, "We love you dearly, but you really need to get a job and get a job quickly." And my mother always encouraged me to go into education. And I said, I don't want to do that. That throughout my entire experience as a Native person, I never had a Native teacher. And schools were not warm, welcoming, fuzzy places for me. And I thought, why would I want to go back and recreate that kind of educational environment for other people? Because that's how I had been trained. And during that period of time of trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do, I did a variety of things, including working with what was then a Title IX Indian education program in a large urban school district. So I worked with 13 different junior high and middle schools over a course of a year and learned really quickly. I don't do well with students at that time in their life. I also learned I don't do well with high school students and a variety of other students in K through 12. And so I did that and then realized I wanted something else. And so I was able to go and work with the community college as armed with this Latin American history degree as a director of disability services, working with what was then a TRIO program. So a federal program that worked with first generation low income minority students. And one day I was sitting there and a flyer came across my desk for a master's degree program at Penn State. Because not only did Penn State have an American Indian leadership program for educational leadership, what people often forget is that there was a sister program, the American Indian Special Education Teacher Training Program, which was directed for many years by a woman, a non-Native woman named Anna Gajar over in special education. And so I got this flyer for this master's degree. It was paying for Native students to come to Penn State. I applied and was accepted into the program, but Dr. Gajar had to call me and tell me that all of the fellowships had been awarded. And so I was admitted but didn't have the money to come to Penn State. And I was devastated with this acceptance. And she said, don't give up. We'll see what we can do. And about 2 weeks before the semester started in 1994, she called and said, we have found monies for one more student to come in if you would like to come. And so I quit my job and moved to Pennsylvania and finished, and that's when I crossed paths with Dr. Warner, finished my master's degree in special education, went home and taught high school special education in North Carolina, and then realized I didn't want to be in high school. I wanted to work in college with disability services. And so I called Dr. Tipiconic, who was then the director of the leadership program, to ask him for a job reference for this position that I had an opportunity for at a college. And he said, "If you thought about coming back for your doctoral degree?" And this was 1 year out of my master's degree. And I said, what are you talking about? I don't have the money. I'm not ready. And he's like, apply. We think there's going to be a fellowship program coming. Just apply for it. And so I applied and got accepted. The money had not come through. But at that time, we had a really good relationship with the graduate school. And there was a woman there, and I cannot remember her last name, Kathy, African-American woman. I'll have to remember her name. She was very supportive of the program over the years. She was able to carve enough money together to pay my tuition and fees until the fellowship money came through. And so I was able to come in as a cohort of one in the American Indian Leadership Program to work on my doctoral degree. And then the next year we got other students. And so I went through that program. Dr. Tipiconic chaired my dissertation. We wrote together, did lots of things together. He was always the one who told me when I doubted that I had the ability to make it through a doctoral program that I was smarter than I thought I was, and that I could swim with the big fish. Mm-hmm. And that I needed those words because he always reminded me of that. And when I graduated, he was the one that helped make that connection to get my first job because I didn't think that I had what it took to be a faculty member. And about 2.5 years after that, he also called me and said, "It's time for you to come back to Penn State." And I said, "For what?" And he said, we're going to hire a new faculty member. I said, "And what?" He said, "We don't know. We're going to hire a new faculty member. We want you to come and interview." And I said, "Who else is interviewing?" He said, "You." And so I came. Dean Monk, David Monk was the dean at that time. I came and I interviewed. And Dean Monk, David Monk, who's just retired, had this vision that we would do cross collaborations. And so his vision was that we would have a collaboration between special ed and ed leadership. And I'm one of about 5 people in the nation that does Indigenous ed, special ed, and ed leadership. And so I came as a brand new pre-tenured faculty member in the College of Education with 49% of me in special ed and 51% of me in ed leadership. And to my knowledge, you may know differently, in Penn State's almost 200-year history, I was the first and only American Indian woman to be promoted and tenured at Penn State. And I say that not as a testament or a tribute to me, but to say in 200 years, I'm the only one that it could find to promote and tenure. I mean, Linda was here and worked, but in 200 years that we couldn't find and retain and mentor and support a Native woman to be a professor with tenure at Penn State. And I think
Can I add a little bit to that?
Yeah.
The faculty that I told you was so supportive of us, was very supportive when I came. And Dr. Willer was a, professor, education excellence, some kind of whatever. And so he was on the permanent university tenure committee. And he made sure there was somebody from our college on every tenure level as I started through. And when I got the job offer to go to Missouri, I thought, how am I going to tell these people that they recruited me and I came back and now I'm just going to bail? The lady who recruited me to Missouri was actually the first female faculty in ed administration here. She then went to Missouri, and I said, sometime when you get time, if there's an opening, I'd like to go back home. I'd like to be closer to home. I told her that at lunch on Friday when she told me she was leaving, and on Monday morning I had an interview. So then I thought, well, I'll just go back for the interview. Now, I'm stretching this story out, Susan, but it's worth it. So I go for the interview. My son comes over. We have a nice visit. And I come back to Penn State. I love Penn State. I had no intention of ever leaving. And the dean of the College of Missouri called me up and said, well, we'd like to hire you. And he said, what would it take? And I said, $70,000. This is 1995. He said, okay. I went, oh my gosh, now I've got to tell Willower, who's done everything in his power to keep me here and to help this program be successful. And I thought, he's going to be so mad at this. And then I thought, no, he's not. He's going to understand. This is an amazing opportunity. Mm-hmm. I went to Missouri as the highest paid associate faculty member on that campus because of Penn State. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, and I think that's and so that it's clear, because I know this is being taped. I believe Penn State blue and white. I think Penn State has been. And I posted this on Twitter this morning. I would not be able to do the things that I do if it was not for all the opportunities and experiences and support that I had at Penn State, and if it was not for John Tipiconic, and others. There were others within our department who were very supportive. But I also think that we have to really interrogate why, in this long history of the institution, that we've not had more, not just women, but more Native faculty in general. And when I was here, there were only 3 of us. I was the only female. John Tipiconic was within the college, and John Sanchez was here as a faculty member. And so 3 Native faculty on the tenure track line. And I think that there's a lot that needs to be done in a place that really heralds itself as the blueprint to foster diversity for the Big Ten and other places. And so I would say that to anybody, that it's been a great place, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think, so I came back as a faculty member and was promoted and tenured. And then John Tipiconic and I were faculty together, and then he had an opportunity to go to Arizona State University around 2010. And when he left, it was like a divorce for me. I told him I felt like I had lost my best friend and my partner, but I needed him to leave so that and he knew that, so that I could be seen as an independent scholar and faculty member. And I thank him for that all the time. And then 2.5 years later, I had a Fulbright Award to New Zealand. And when I came back, I had an opportunity to go home to North Carolina to work at North Carolina State. And I left. And when I left, that was one of the hardest things that I ever did. And I've only been back once in those 7 years, because I felt like the weight of the program was on my shoulders. And we had a Native woman, Felicia Wilkins Turner, who was working as, not in a faculty position, but as a research associate with what was then the Center for the Study of Leadership in American Indian Higher Ed, and also working with the AILP. And she stayed on. She's Lumbee. She stayed on and kept the program running for a couple of years. But what I realized at that time was that Penn State needed to make a decision. Was it going to make the existence and continuance of the American Indian leadership dependent upon American Indian faculty members and their collaborators writing grants to keep the program going? Or was it going to move beyond using us as a really pretty recruitment tool and having our picture on brochures and a sign out to say we have a leadership program? Was it going to move beyond that to institutionalize the leadership program into something that was not grant dependent? Because the leadership program was not started in 1970s with the intention of 40 years later not being able to sustain itself if it didn't have grant funding, and the university failed to take on its responsibility to put institutional dollars into that program. And I said this to Dean Monk, and I said this to faculty. And I felt like that was a really important time for the institution to ask itself a question. Do we want to sustain the program? And if we do, then we need to put the money in, not just money, but institutional support into it. And so I left. I think Hollie can talk about her experience. I came back a year later because Penn State recruited me back to come and interview to come back. And I said, here's what it would take for me to come, which is this amount of salary. We had an endowed chair within the college that could have been used towards the leadership program. And I said to them, it is dangerous to recruit one Native faculty member in on their own. There needs to be at least another. And the university decided that it was at a point where it was not able or willing to make that commitment. And so the position was not offered back to me. what I asked at that time before I turn it over to Hollie is that I think that I understand that institutions change and maybe it's not. Maybe the program doesn't need to stay here anymore. But we need to honor the tradition that we've had over these 40 years, and we need to close out the program in a good way, right? We had drums, we had blankets, we had other things, and we needed to honor that memory and that tradition, and we did not do that. And I think for me, of all the failures, and I've had lots of failures in my career, of all the failures in my career, that will be the one that haunts me the most, is that I was not able, under my leadership, to be able to get the institution to understand that this program, I mean, it's impacted us in ways that we'll never be able to articulate, and 218 other people who've gone through this program and our families, and all we asked is that the institution close it out in a good way. And so it's a very emotional experience to be able to come back to know that we didn't close it out in that way. And I think it really does go back to that question I asked is, what is the future? Is there a future for Native leadership at Penn State? And I'm not saying there's not, but what I am saying is if we're going to rekindle that, then the institution needs to rekindle it in a good way, and in a way that honors the sacrifices that many people made in order to establish and sustain the program. So, thank you.
Okay. So I'm not going to talk about the history I never directed the program. And actually, I was never a member of the program either. And people don't know this because they generously adopted me when I came over. Because when I came, it was a master's program for principal credentialing. And so I actually brought a group of students out to Penn State, and we were working with the American Indian Housing Initiative, and they were doing straw bale structures on my home reservation. And so we had brought them out to do kind of a media junket, as Penn State likes to do. And there happened to be a time the kids were with some people, and the faculty member I was working with had a meeting, and he told me I could walk by Rackley and get coffee in Kern, where they have a coffee shop in the Graduate Studies building. And I had been told to contact Susan and try to get a hold of her. And on the first day I was unable to, and I was able to meet with her the second day that I was there. And so I decided to walk upstairs and made a joke about, what does somebody have to do to get a degree from the great Penn State University? And Paul Begley, who passed away recently, said, well, why don't you come on in here and I'll tell you. And it's history. And I'm Dr. Mackey. So I had funding from another source, but very, very quickly, the American Indian Leadership faculty, John and Susan, were like, come over here, you're our people, and you're going to die here if you don't. And I've been so thankful for that. Because what it is not an education program, right? It's not a degree program. And I just took notes kind of as people were talking. I think, for me, the American Indian Leadership Program is knowing, I have this little girl, right, in Colorado who was born the year that I got my first faculty position, and she's Cheyenne Arapaho, and I get to connect with her, and I saw her when she was in her little swaddling thing, right, and I've watched this little girl grow up that I wouldn't have if I wasn't a part of this program in this university, right? Or I think about, for many of us, when I came to grad school, my mother was in prison, my dad's a high school dropout, nobody goes to college. I had no idea what to expect. And then when I came here, I remember my dad asked me, how long is it going to take you to get there? And I was a single mom, and I had a first grader and a third grader. I'm like, it shouldn't take too long. And I had to get out a map because I didn't even know where Pennsylvania was. And I realized, here's Montana and here's Pennsylvania, and what in the hell am I going to do? Away from everybody I know, my entire support network, I had no idea what I was going to do or how I was going to afford to live. And then you come here and you can't afford to live, right? Because it's expensive. And so it was time to graduate, and I really wanted to walk graduation. But I couldn't afford to, because those robes are almost $700. So for me, the American Indian Leadership Program is John Tipiconic saying, I can't be there, but let me give you my robes. Okay? And that's what it matters to us. It's these connections. It's Susan connecting me with Dr. Warner, because I have to go on the job market and I need a publication. And Dr. Warner's saying, yeah, I'll write with you. Right? So my first publication, my first journal article is with Dr. Warner, so I can get a job. Because now I'm up to my eyeballs in debt because they do not fund enough, and they don't tell you they're not going to fund enough. And I still just as much now as when I graduated because you can't keep up with the payments. So thanks, Penn State. But they're going to call you every year with their campaign and ask you for more money. That's one thing I do not appreciate. But so for me, that's what matters about this program. Because coming here was not what I expected. And I'm very adaptable. Like, I have a number of friends who've gone through the program that it was a much worse experience for them than it was for me. Right? But they don't tell you that 0.04% of faculty in this country are American Indian. Right? So everybody wants to talk about all the ways that different groups are marginalized. They don't tell you that it's highly likely you are not going to meet another American Indian faculty member that you did not either take classes from or graduate with. And that's the reality for a lot of us. You know, they don't really talk about the fact that you're going to be completely disregarded in every single one of your classes because you're not a statistically significant population group. Right? That you're disregarded in all of the literature because you're not a statistically significant population group. So for me, this program taught me how to advocate better. It taught me how to fight better. It taught me perfection, right, in a good way, right, not in that like, oh gosh, you have to be perfect, but that like you have to write perfectly, where you have Dr. Faircloth saying, no, like, do it again, right, not because she's picky, but because you have to do it right if you want something published, if you want to get a job, right, the value placed on perfection in academia is high. Not my, I don't care, right, like, and so do it again, right? Do it again until you get it right. And that's one of the things. Like when we talk about Dr. Faircloth in our little friend group.
It's not always good.
But it's always about, thank God she forced us into perfection when it came to our writing. Because if not, we wouldn't have jobs. We wouldn't be successful. And those things really, really matter, right? And what matters is we have this legacy of people that at any time, this Penn State Mafia is no joke. Mm-hmm. You can call, see, email at any time anyone who's ever graduated from this program, and all you have to do is say, like Linda said, call you, Susan said, call you, or say like, hey, I'm an AILP graduate, and it's like, come into my home, stay in my house, eat with us. It doesn't matter. These doors are open to you because we all know what we had to get through being in this program, being in this space where you have, state college area school districts saying, help us write curriculum, and then we say, okay, let's talk about sovereignty, and they say, oof, that's too much, right? What kind of foods do y'all eat? Right? And every day was like that. Every day. Like I remember one class we had where John Tipiconic was teaching it, and it wasn't an AILP class, but we were the majority in the class. There were 8 of us. And we loved that class. It was the only class that you always had Indian perfect attendance because we were the majority in the class. We did not want to miss that class because it was the only time, and I can guarantee probably in all of our lives, that we were the majority in a class. Mm-hmm. And it was like methods or something like that. It was some random class. It was really cool. We've never experienced that. Because usually in our classes here, even with supportive faculty, we were disregarded. At conferences, we're disregarded. We recently attended a conference where we intentionally put together a panel, and we were walking as a group, and people were staring at us because they're so unused to seeing a group of American Indian scholars all walking together. And I find that really upsetting, right? And I find it upsetting that it took something like Standing Rock to get people to pay attention to the fact that there are Indian scholars enough to actually care what we have to say now. And I find it upsetting that Penn State has evolved the way that it has with AILP, because my story is much different. So when Susan left, and then they contacted me to apply for the position, it was not in a way that would actually help me at all, right? So they wanted me to direct the program. They wanted, the center that's associated with it. I was in my second year as an assistant professor. It doesn't pay anything. And they didn't want to do anything that would help support me towards tenure in terms of like course reductions or extended time towards tenure. And that's upsetting to me. Right? And so we talk about what is the future, like what's a way forward with this? We've had so many conversations. We were supposed to have a conversation with people from the College of Education today. And they say because of transitions in leadership, because of travel schedules. No. Like we've had these conversations in 2012. They don't like the answers that we give them. And being a part of our national organization, you might be traveling, but I'd like to know where to, because all of our conferences are coming up in November, right? If it's personal travel, that's fine. But just tell us you don't value us, because that's what it amounts to. Because if you are a new dean coming in and you have any interest in this program, take advantage of the fact that we're right here. And once again, willing to have a conversation with you after the hundreds of conversations that we've had with people. Right? It's not diplomatic, it's just the truth. We're here. College of Ed had a department meeting yesterday. The department where I came from, you worked. Where are you? Not in this room. That makes me a little bit angry. What do we have to give? How much money do you make on the backs of the AILP? Because they like to talk about the accomplishments of the people from the AILP. It looks great for them. So when I came, they had slipped from 1st to 5th, which I think is just funny because that's still pretty impressive. I don't even know if they're ranked now.
And I think they be in the educational leadership.
Yeah, the educational leadership program, right? And none of that mattered to me because it didn't matter to me. It was this amazing institution with these amazing faculty. And a lot of them have moved on, and they have been replaced with some pretty tight faculty. I mean, there's some really good folks here. But I don't see them in the room, right? I don't see them caring. And I don't see anybody that can really support Native students the way that they need to be supported, right? And I don't see them going out into communities, and you have to get out into communities if you're going to support Native students. I don't know if any of you were in that room when I made the comment about like the future of this organization, right? It's that engaged community work. You have to get out there.
Speaking of microphone, no, you're fine. I'm gonna open it up. We have about 17 minutes, and so I'm gonna go ahead and open it and see if the audience has any questions. But if not, we can just kind of continue this conversation. And I think you're 100% correct with everything you said. I too am disappointed that no one from College of Ed is here.
I'd like to say that. As director of this program and then later in Tennessee, I was associate vice chancellor at the system level. And the amount of support that it would take to add another student, to support a graduate is ridiculous that a university this size cannot say this program is important enough, has enough of a legacy, that we can't just support it on our own. They don't need Department of Ed money. I mean, when you think about it, you've got a class of 20 people. Adding another person is funny money. You've already paid for your faculty. So it seems to me, I don't know where the buck stops. I would guess immediately with the dean.
It's a matter of will. It's not a matter of
it's they don't want to bad enough, which I guess is okay in Indian country because we have tribal colleges too. So,
well, my name is Mary DePuy. My husband Vic was involved in the program for many years, and since he's passed, I wear the mantle. But both of us were on college education faculty in the Department of CNI, curriculum instruction. And I want you to know that some of us have been fighting this battle for at least 20 years, and we're all disappointed. That's the nicest thing. It's not what he would have said, it's what I've heard, but that's what I'll say. And blessed memory, bless his heart. He's gone into retirement after 20 years. Can you imagine being dean for 20 years? That's unheard of. But that entire time, he worked with Vic and me to see if we couldn't recruit enough people, find some source of support, do something when it was dying, as you say, to bring the program back. And it includes both our department and the Department of Ed Leadership. And we were unable to get faculty to come on and say, yes, we think this is a way that the college should do it. I'm telling you, he has worked as hard as anybody I've ever known. And we were all just, as I drank a glass of wine with him at his retirement party, we agreed. This is one of the things that disappoints him the most, disappoints us the most. The college is doing many wonderful things, and I'm glad they're doing it. But this is something in which we have always had a chance to really make a name. It's a national thing. I mean, I don't have to tell you all that. We know that. But it's very disappointing that that's the way it's come down. So
Well, and I appreciate your comments on that. I would respectfully disagree because we presented him two different models that were actually very viable. And I think being a dean is just hard, right? You're stuck.
You can't have as much freedom of movement as it's
Right. I think that he did really want to.
He did really want to. What he wanted was faculty in the working faculty in either department to say, yes, we want this to happen. And that's what he couldn't do. So I'm really sad.
I think he also, we had lots of conversations with the provost office too. And so I think we need to, also situate it there that, when was it Erickson was provost and would put in some money for some gatherings and things like that, and then he transitioned out. And I think the new provost, this was around 2013, was reluctant at that time to commit the resources that he needed to do it. And so I think that we have to. I don't think there's one place that the blame rests, right? I think that there are a lot of people trying to carve a lot of things together and do a lot of things to sustain a program. I think that this is really an institutional issue, and that the president's office and the provost office didn't put in the institutional support.
Well, in some ways, though, when you're talking about course reductions or a little bit more pay, or thinking creatively about the way courses are delivered, that's not so much.
Right. I think and that's what I'm saying. I think it's multi-pronged, right? I think the responsibility rests at multiple different levels. And being a director of a school now at a land-grant institution, I understand that in a way that I didn't understand that as a faculty member. That, it's people come to me for things all the time, and I think my job is to help you get what you need and what you want, but I don't always have the resources to do that. I didn't understand that as a faculty member, but I think that there's a lot of responsibility. I used to have this conversation with Graham Spanier's office when he was here. If we really value diversity and we value the American Indian piece of that diversity, then here's what you need to do. If you don't value it, then just tell me that. And I won't like that, but I can accept we don't value it, and then there's no resources. But don't say that here's the institution's American Indian Leadership Program, and then you just let it die. So
well, I think
make your words and your actions match, and I think that's what's been missing in many ways.
One of the first things I learned as director was how ineffectual it was to try to raise money. Because sponsored programs has the lock on who you can talk to. And so, we come from a community where we just call up our friends and say, XYZ, can you do this or can you do that? Or who do you know in Kellogg? Who do you know in, any foundation? And you're not allowed to do that at the university level. So you have to go through sponsored programs because maybe they already have a Keck Foundation grant out there or a Gates Foundation grant that they're pushing. Maybe they've already got a Kellogg that they're pushing. And so you're just left sort of scrambling around trying to get nickels and dimes instead of being able to go after institutional level, something that would institutionalize the program.
And I am remiss, and I will say that the College of Ed and the Office of the Vice Provost for Educational Equity did fund the panel. So they did give money to bring people in, and I think that's really important. But I also think somebody needed to be here, right? Because that's also, this is exactly what you're saying, that part of what made this program so strong were the connections. You can't just, right? I mean, it's very important to have funding.
Yeah, it's easy to write a check.
But people need to put in some of the time too.
And I think it's important. I know there may be questions from the audience. I mean, I would not want us to leave on a negative. Now, to say that, I think we've all said it really clearly. Like, I recognize every day when I wake up that I would not be able to travel the world and be able to do the thing that I love next to my child and my husband most of my life, which is to be an educational leadership faculty member. I love. My mother worked for 37 years in a hog slaughtering factory, and I get to wake up every morning and get paid to think, right? Like, I can't, and deal with some pretty testy faculty, but I get paid to think, right? My elders would have never thought that they would be paid to think. And so I owe a debt to the leadership program for that, and for the ability to be able to take this person from rural North Carolina, whose parents graduated from high school, and to not just allow me to earn 1 degree, but 2, and to be able to be a faculty member. And so I think that, I can speak for myself. If you hear pain or anger or whatever, it is not about this not being a place that has enabled me to do many things. It's an angst and an anger and a passion about this is a place that had the potential to enable, hundreds of other Native people to be able to do great things. And it dropped the ball on that. And I think that that's something that if you were here and you were a part of that program, I feel it particularly strong because I was the last director, right? And I had to make a conscious decision to leave. And I also suggested when they were reaching out to Hollie, I didn't think it was good to have a pre-tenured faculty member on her own, because I realized what I gave up on the tenure track, the sleep that I gave up. I was not married until the year that I got tenure, didn't have a child until after I got tenure, lived in a very white place, away from my family, didn't have that strong community. I didn't want another Native person to go through that on their own, right? And I said, if you want to bring Hollie or somebody else, bring them in, but bring them in with others, right? And so I feel a strong sense of responsibility that the program ended with me as the last director. And so that's where my whatever you want to call it, my negativity rests, is what could I have done better? How could we have leveraged the support? And yet I also realized what we asked for was to institutionalize this program. And at some point we have to walk away when an institution makes a choice not to institutionalize it. And so I think that's the charge that I have, is let us recognize the 50 years of impact this program has had. But let us also recognize that we could have had another 50 years if the institution had made a decision that this was important to the institution.
Right. And I'm more critical because much like Latinx studies, African American studies, all of these, right? So when you're in classes with people who are critical, and then they can do this with programs, like, like I would never take back my time here. And I mean, I'm obviously a little bit high frequency anyway, right? And I'm highly engaged in activism, and I'm highly engaged in Native communities in ways that most of my AILP peers are not. And so I look at those communities, or when I'm on a search in the middle of the winter for a girl that we know we are not going to find alive, I think this is why it matters that programs that exist in universities like this need to be critical and sustain them in different ways, because we're really cutting off a pipeline, right? So there are people who have been educated in this institution who are now able to do remarkable things for their communities, and now we can't because there aren't a lot of Penn States. And so that's where my anger comes from, is there aren't a lot of Penn States. There are not a lot of places where you can listen to like Dolores Huerta talk on Friday night. Or I saw Paul Rusesabagina and then got to go to Rwanda, and then I got to talk about him with people who knew him and get two sides of a story. You don't get those opportunities, and the ways that those opportunities equip you to go back into your community and make real change matters. hours, right? And the people who are at Penn State who could have sustained that or closed it effectively, they know this because they taught me this, right? They know. And so now, like, where are you? And so in some ways it makes you feel cheated, right? Like you taught me this, like you sold me this bullshit, and then what? Like, where are you?
On that happy note.
I know, but it is a happy note, right? I think that is the power of these institutions. It's the power of these networks that we have.
Well,
Because we all need
think
allies.
Too that the happy note is the sort of tentacles of what we've done so far has really had far-reaching effects on Indian education. And, you know, when you go back and you look at the number of tribal college presidents who were Penn State graduates, I mean, it's been an enormous influence. So it may not always rest here, but it's going to grow in little pockets, perhaps, across the country because, you know, they're reading your scholarship. They're taking your classes. They're, you know, not just you two. There's bunches, not bunches, but there are other faculty out there who, you know, who are graduates of the program. So, you know, they can't take that away from us.
Right. I think we had a question.
Oh, it's more of a comment, but I'm Christina Snyder. I'm in the history department with Kathleen, and I wanted to just thank you all for coming and for sharing your experiences and your insights, and also for your honesty, because I think that it makes it clear what Penn State might have to offer, and also a lot of areas for improvement. So even though I'm not in the College of Ed, this helps me think about our campus culture more generally. And I just want to let you know I really appreciate you coming here. Thank you.
I would also say, I mean, I'm looking at Audrey Moretsky was here when I was here, and there was the Indigenous Knowledge Consortium, and so they were always a good partner with the leadership program. And then I was here, and I think you were too, Linda, when Vic was here, Vic Dupuy, and, you know, there was the student teaching opportunity out in the Dakotas, and then still have, and so I think there, you know, there were lots of opportunities, and probably some missed opportunities, people who collaborated. And I think that if we're telling the story of the program, then it's not possible to remember all of those names and people. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that there have been many supporters in big and small ways over the years.
And many possibilities, right? I mean, that's the thing, is this is the start of a conversation that could lead to many possibilities as well.
Can I just comment that there's we're a land grant university, and I think that, you know, our university here is fine, you know, all those kind of things. We can talk about that, but we need to go to the university, not beyond the university, to our state, the way they are thinking about it, because there's really no interest that I've seen much in the states here in Pennsylvania in being involved with the kinds of things that we've been talking here. And I just like to say, you know, how can we go on beyond the university to the state?
And there's some really cool things happening at Carlisle with NAGPRA and repatriating remains. And I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting ways that the university could, in fact, stay connected with
The law school.
We're making the same argument at NDSU right now, too. As a land-grant institution, that means serving more than just the non-native people who live there.
But I also think that, I mean, I tell this story at my own institution. So my daughter, I said, is Cheyenne and Arapaho, and I teach and work at Colorado State University, which is on the traditional land of the Cheyenne and Arapaho and the Ute and Ute Mountain people. And, you know, what I've started to say when I introduce myself now, when we do our land acknowledgement, is to say that, you know, every day that I walk on the lands of this institution and walk in my building, I do it with a heavy heart, because I realize that I'm able to do the very thing that I love dearly, being an academic, in a place that was built based on the forceful removal and killing and displacement of my daughter's people. That's a really contested space to be in. And I think that goes back to Penn State, is that, we were having a question about who are the traditional people of this land. We never did a land acknowledgement when I was here. This is the first time I've seen this listing of these are the people, because nobody could ever tell us who are the traditional indigenous people of this land. But whoever those people were, this institution was built on the backs and the lives and the languages and the cultures of those indigenous people. And there is a responsibility to give back and to honor that forceful taking and displacement. And yes, it goes beyond State College, right? But there may not be a large group of indigenous people here now, but their histories and their connections are here and they live on throughout this state. And so I do think that's, if we really live out that land grant mission, it's built on two things. One, it's built on serving the people of the land, and education is at its core, at the core of the founding of land grant institutions. And then the third piece is, what do we do to those people who are displaced so that we can have a building? And so I think that's the perfect argument, right, is that this is why this institution was built, was to serve the people of the land and to provide education to those who couldn't afford it. And we have to acknowledge that it came at a great cost, which was our people's death and displacement. What are we going to do about that?
They don't want to talk about it.
No, right, because it's not pretty. But I think that's, if you really want to, I was at a session a couple of days ago where we were talking about the former president of the Colorado State always likes to talk about Abraham Lincoln and the Moral Land Grant Act. And I said, okay, let's talk about Abe, but let's also talk about the Native people whose lands were taken so that Abe could have the Moral Land Grant Act, right? So it's not just talk about Abe to the exclusion of Native people. And that's a piece that, people don't often want to talk about. I think Hollie mentions it. They want to eat our foods and wear our jewelry and, dress up as pilgrims and Indians, but you don't want to talk about massacre and displacement because that's not pretty. But it is a part of the founding of this institution.
I would like to say that it's going to sound like it's total non sequitur, but on Tuesday, October the 15th, we're doing a national teach-in for Indigenous Peoples Day. And if you look at teachrock.org, you will find curriculum materials. There's actually a pretty cool video called Rumble, Indians Who Rock the World. And we're doing a national K-12 promotion to get everybody to add Indian curriculum on that particular day. We wanted to do it on Indigenous Peoples Day, but not all schools are in session on Indigenous Peoples Day. And that reminds me that one of the things that I really want to comment on is bless the people who opened their schools to us when we came out here, but they always wanted to see us in our traditional dress.
Yes.
And when I was director of the program, I said, I'd be glad to bring students over, but they're not coming over in feathers. Mm-hmm. They're coming over as students at Penn State.
And this is my traditional dress.
Yeah. So, and then, you get little kids going, you guys still live in teepees? And so look at teachrock.org and help us bring more Indigenous pedagogy into the classroom.
Thank you all so very much. This was a really wonderful conversation, and I appreciate you coming and sharing, and as Christina said, teaching us more about the history of the program and thinking about how we can help create communities across campus. Thank you to the audience members for being here. I really appreciate your presence as well, and please help me thank our panelists.